Hello, I'm Michelle Rain, Assistant Director at the Wood County District Public Library. It's April 24th, 2014, and we're talking with Lolita Guthrie, who has been past president of the Wood County chapter of the Ohio Genealogical Society, is a fellow of the Federation of Genealogical Societies, and has been Outstanding Citizen of the Year. We're in the Carter House in Bowling Green, Ohio. Good morning, Lolita. Thank you for being with us today. I have notes here that you were the Chamber of Commerce Outstanding Citizen in 1988, past president of the Wood County chapter of the Ohio Genealogical Society for many years, and you're a fellow of the Ohio Genealogical Society. And the thing I found most interesting is that you were a living volunteer Hall of Honor Award for the Federation of Genealogical Societies, and I thought it was funny that they had to designate that you're a living volunteer for the Genealogical Society. So we'll just jump right in, and you can, if you wouldn't mind, to tell me, where did you grow up and how did you come to Bowling Green?
Well, I grew up around the edge of Anderson, Indiana. I'm a Hoosier from way back, and I'm the fourth in a family of five. The three older ones were sisters, and there was 8 years gap before they came along, and then I came along and a younger brother. So he had all those big sisters to take care of him.
And what did your family do?
Well, my family we had just really moved to town. Dad his family before him had a farm, but the farms had gone bankrupt before the Depression hit the towns. And so we left the farm, I guess, when I was 1 year old, and he took over a hatchery and managing it in Anderson, Indiana. And then later on, he took over a poultry store. We used to buy our chickens and eggs. The farmers would sell small flocks of them, and we would do the cleaning of them, eviscerating of them, and sell them as dress locally to stores before we had any big supermarkets. What
does it mean to dress a chicken? I'm one of those people who gets my chicken at the grocery store.
We start right with killing it. My dad was quite creative with his way of trying to meet the keeping a clean process, because it's a matter of, in some way, cutting off their neck. And so you get all this blood. And he invented his own system of kind of a cylinder with cones, so you would stick the chicken down in and pull the neck out and slit it. So I have stood at the killing vats and maybe done 500 in a day.
Oh my goodness.
That would be a big day. But as the war came on, chickens were not rationed. Poultry was not rationed, and so there was a demand. We couldn't always find enough to meet the demand, but people wanted chicken because they couldn't get beef. They wouldn't have enough ration points, or pork. So,
did you raise the chickens, or
that was on the sideline to try to stay ahead of what became the beginning of the fried chicken. My dad bought some on it since we were out at the edge of town. He actually would buy, I think he bought maybe 100 or 200. I was doing it on a 2-week period. That would give him the supply he needed, we called broilers. And he actually put them in 4-layer racks of cages, and we started them in the basement of the house. Then he built on our own property smaller buildings we could move them into, so they would be on floors, and until they got to be about 10 or 12 weeks old. I'll bet now they put in a force feed that they're ready in 8 weeks.
Yeah.
It's all the stuff that's been added. But back in those days.
What was it like to have a bunch of chickens in the basement?
Well, my mother was not very happy. And if we happened a couple of times, I can remember, and really this only went on for probably 6 months or so, until he had enough barn space, built brooder space they called it, to move it outside. But we did have one rain, and I remember she had to bring him upstairs and just take everything out of that room and put lots and lots of paper.
Yeah.
We used a lot of newspaper because the one job that went with this cleaning every day was that we had to put newspaper down in their drop pans where the droppings would go through. And that was one job that my little brother and I had. And then even when we moved it to the outside facility, we changed clothes when we came home to school because our first job was to go out and get these in, and the paper, roll up and put new paper down for the next day.
Yeah.
So that was our work, and it was right there with us.
And how old were you when you were doing that?
Oh, I probably started when I was 10.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Did you have other chores at the time?
Not too much, but this house did have a furnace. We didn't have to carry in wood or anything.
Yeah.
When we moved to Cincinnati and bought a house down there, we bought a furnace that you had to feed wood to or coal, but we had passed it at that point in Indiana.
So you lived in Cincinnati first and then moved to Indiana?
No,
okay.
I meant after Merle and I were married.
Oh, gotcha. Well, let's talk about Mr. Guthrie. How did you meet Merle?
Well, Ball State, I was the first one in the family. They felt they had enough money that we could probably pay my way, and I always wanted to be a teacher. And Ball State was just 20 miles away in Muncie, Indiana. So as our plans, I graduated high school in June of '43, and had plans of starting there in the fall. And along in August, opened the local newspaper, and there was an article that the Army was taking over the girls' dorm at Ball State. And with that, I said to my mother, "Can I bring home a cadet?" And she said, "Absolutely not." But I brought him home on Christmas. So that meant that the students had to get housing in private homes. And I lived just across the street, really, a half a block from the administration building of the campus. So when I did start college, the Army moved in their own scheduled hours of classes. They marched from class to class in companies. And so to some intermixing, they established a date bureau. Now instead of a whole union building, we had one room that was kind of the community room. And so they set up a couple of hours when it happened to be Merle from the Army group and a senior from the women's. And we turned in little slips of paper to kind of exchange something about ourselves and where we were from and so forth. And so I got a call from Merle and set up our first date to go to a dance that as a mixer they were having that Saturday night. So when he called in to the house on Friday night to see if he could pick me up just to go out for a Coke during their break, my roommate said, "She's gone home." So he thought he was being stood up for the weekend. But my way of going through college was to get back to that poultry business and do my work on Saturday before I could come back.
Absolutely. So was he surprised to see you that Saturday, or?
No, she had assured him that I would be back.
Okay.
She was very used to that.
Yeah. How long did you all date?
Well, that would have been, in March they decided they no longer needed this Army Specialized Training Program. They needed the infantry more. And they were working on the European theater. So they marched them all out down to the railroad station and shipped them off to Camp Hood, Texas. And of course we had really, I said yes, I would marry him, but in the summer then while they were in New Jersey before they shipped over, he got a week off and came by train to Indianapolis. My sister took me to meet him on the train. He got off long enough to get me to join him, and the same on the return trip, but I spent a week meeting his family. So that was in '44.
And how long had you known each other before you decided you would get engaged?
Really, we decided that'd be probably around Christmas.
So it's quick.
I still went out on a couple of dates at Christmas time, but when well, anyway, that was the end of that.
Well, when did he come back then from the war?
I kept watching the paper because they were shipping them over to the Pacific, but his troop was never sent over there. He was in the 102nd Infantry, and he was one of the very few who went over with them and came back with them, and they kept him there, and at the end he was in the headquarters. It was very near Switzerland, doing all the business work of it as he has always done, and so he had to get everybody's records ready. And so when he came back, it was March of '46. He had to go directly to be discharged at Fort Levinson in Kansas. He went home for a week or so, and then had to get himself back to Anderson, Indiana real fast. And when he came back, my dad still needed help, so if he wanted to stay, our wedding was planned in July. So his poor mom was very disappointed that he did not come back out there.
Oh, yeah. Well, travel wasn't as easy as it is now.
No.
Not at all. And so did you finish your degree?
I finished my degree and stayed because he was 1 year behind. They accepted all those credits, and he went into business education, or business. He was so good in majoring in accounting and so forth. And so he decided, the president and then a math prof who was his mentor had recommended the University of Minnesota. So he did his master's. So I taught 2 years in Washington School in Muncie, which is, being the name Washington, is probably the oldest one. It had been built about Civil War days.
Sure. Yeah.
And then we went to Minneapolis for his year of residency. And although we'd expected to stay longer, he was offered a job at the University of Cincinnati. And so he went there, and he went back for a couple of summers and finished up his doctorate.
And what was his doctorate in?
It's in business education.
Okay. Yeah.
And at Minnesota, that was taught in the College of Education, and it was at Cincinnati. When we moved to Bowling Green, the division of business education was within the College of Business Administration, and it's split about 50-50 across the country.
And when did you come to Bowling Green?
54. We had been at Cincinnati 4 years. I taught 2 years in Muncie, 1 in Minneapolis, and then I did a year in Cincinnati before going on casual substitute, because it was time for a family, but you don't always time those the way you want to. And so I refused to leave the children in the middle of the year, which I ended up doing. And the same thing happened to at least my daughter. I mean,
yes. Best laid plans. Well, what did you think when you arrived in Bowling Green? You had been in hilly Cincinnati, and, and then you came to Bowling Green.
Flat. I guess my comments to Merle before we came was because I was expecting, I couldn't come up and see about the job or choosing housing. And I said, will it be as easy for us to move from Bowling Green as it seems to be from Cincinnati? I wasn't sure that I wanted to commit myself, although I much prefer a small town
yes.
to the city. And he said, yeah, I think so. So when job offers came a year or so later, had a wonderful president. Not everyone thought the same, but Merle did, and he said, you know, this, and the president said, I think you better go look at it, but this is what I can offer you. And the opportunities were here. So,
Are you surprised to find yourself still here all these years later?
well, age-wise, yes, but no. We had such wonderful, with his job, we had such wonderful things because he would always get a job in the summer as a visiting professor. So we would go and stay on another campus for anywhere from 2 to 6 or 8 weeks. So we've stayed in as far away as Bellingham, Washington,
Wow.
and Logan, Utah.
Wow.
And the first one was in Albany, New York, in a little town of Altamont. We got a professor's house for and it was a very old antique house. It was very interesting. But the people living next door were good babysitters. Carla was 10 months old, and so, we had wonderful experiences seeing parts, for memories, can't beat my life. Been there, done that.
That's probably nothing better can be said.
That's right.
How many children then?
Two children.
2 children? Mm-hmm.
Scott and Carla, and Scott lives locally, and he was in maintenance with the security with the university, and retired. But I used to laugh and say, "Well, I'm not like a mother bird. I'm not pushing, but I'm beginning to nudge." But he's very frugal with his money. He spends it on his toy collections. So he has his own home. Everything's paid for. And now retired himself and been on call.
When you first came to Bowling Green, what was the most important or interesting thing that you found here?
Well, there was no housing. My husband he said, "I hate it. We've now bought our own home, even though it was only a 4-room house. It had woods around us on the rolling hill, as you said. And the best he could get was a downstairs apartment that is 4 doors north of where we are, 205 North Grove Street." And we lived there for this first year, and in February, during the first year, the woman who lived in our house had lived alone, died, and the house went up for sealed bid, silent auction, in August, and so we bought it. So we moved 4 doors away, and we have been there since 1955.
Well, and you showed me a beautiful quilt. Tell me a little bit about the quilt that you started.
Well, this is a tablecloth.
A tablecloth.
It's
a tablecloth.
A patchwork tablecloth.
Okay.
I had odds and I did a lot of sewing and gathering up odds and ends of slipcover material. I had a sample book from a sister. They had a furniture store then, and different fabrics. Passed it together with the borders being a sheet that kind of tied them together. And so this was really coming upon the bicentennial of the United States. And in December, I had it ready to have for just an evening dinner together. My husband wanted to entertain a couple the wife was a student of his from Beirut, Lebanon. And so I said, well, let's have the Compsons from Findlay, because the wife there was a former student, and she was the second wife of an engineer. Well, he was probably more than an engineer, but from Marathon. And of course, had traveled all over the world. So those 4 people came, and they all wrote their name on the sheet for the first time. And fortunately, I really didn't find it until I was thinking of coming here today. And I have their names, and that was the beginning. And then in the summer, where people were having block parties and such, I decided it was time to have one in our neighborhood. I knew who lived in every house, but I was getting to the point students were moving in. There was not too many students, but there was a change of people. And so I sent my son out to take a picture of each house in this area. And then I wrote who was living in it. And then we had the potluck in the backyard. Of course, they all signed the tablecloth. And I think we had 40 or so coming across the backyards and so forth, which you can hardly do anymore. And they were amazed to look to see who their next door neighbors were. I mean, that made an impression. When I put it together in a scrapbook or a loose leaf notebook, Tilly Moyer at the library was impressed by it, and so she made a duplicate copy. So those pictures are all, and the names of the people are over at the library.
And how many names are on your tablecloth now?
It's well over 600. Merloy's tried to have 1 or 2 classes of his master's people have dessert with us at least. So they've all broken bread with us, as I say. It includes a bridge group. I had the block parties 2 years in a row.
Yeah.
So it adds up. And I did it for about 10 years, and it hasn't been touched since the 80s.
Even so, it's a really nice memento of all the visitors and guests to your home.
Is.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. So when you came to Bowling Green, were you ever a teacher here in Bowling Green?
No, just I did take over my son's Cub Scout. They needed a leader, so I did Cub Scouting. Sort of helped. When they moved the senior high out, if you know where I live, at 123 North Grove, we're very close to what now is open ground.
Right, yes.
Was previously the junior high, and before that, the senior high. In fact, the library, when we came to town, was in that senior high. And so when they moved the senior high out, I always commented, then they loaded it with the junior high kids, and it was the bulk, I think it was 63, because I went to the hospital to find out the birth rate for that year and determined it was the highest year of births. I mean, that class would have been, not 63, but when they would have been at that age. So it was packed. A building that was built for like 350 was now housing over 500.
Oh my.
The senior high decided they didn't have room for all 4 grades, they only took 3. But I always said they took the budget for the athletics, at least, of the 4 years. And all they left behind when they pulled out of that building were the dents in the sidewalk. So we organized Mother of Bob Kittens, which is M-O-B.
You're a mom.
And I would work with the kids and the Dean of Women to do a 2-sided newsletter. I don't remember how often, but every month, or maybe it was more than once a month, but maybe every 2 weeks or something. Where the kids all took them home because it was a 1-sheeter and we didn't do any mailing. Then the other thing, because of the bad sidewalk, as I say, we walked along that to go to church. One of our mothers, who was she was enough an artist, I had her sit upstairs in the house across the street, which is now the Nader's home, and that's his grandparents' home. And look at that and draw, because when the kids came out to get on the bus, there was nothing but a hill and grass on one of the grass slabs. So it was as messy as it could be. And so she redesigned it to have concrete with a planter back against the building, and then we furnished the cost of the shrubbery and had the high school 4-H group do all of that work. So we got
everybody back together.
That's right. And then it made a much nicer waiting area for the kids to wait for the buses.
Well, what are your thoughts now that building is gone?
I miss it.
Yeah.
But that's what's happened to Bowling Green. If you've gone back to some of the planned questions there,
Yes.
how it has changed,
Yeah.
everything's moved out. And one reason we stayed where we are, as I said, there wasn't housing to move out to. It would have meant, unless I wanted to be at home all the time, 2 cars.
Yeah.
We got by with 1 car, and almost up until the year Merle retired, because he could walk or ride a bike back and forth for lunch and come home. And everything on the west side of Worcester has stayed pretty much neighborhood.
That's one of my favorite things about Bowling Green,
Yeah.
is the neighborhoods.
Yeah, and ours is going to have a rebirth. We've got some new neighbors, and they're really interested in neighborhood. So it's where I've had empty houses for a while. I may have.
Might have to get out the tablecloth again.
Right.
Well, one thing that, when I mention your name around town, one thing you're really known for is your work with the Genealogical Society. So tell me about the early days when they met in your basement.
Well, we did the collating down there. The genealogy group they were trying to start as part of the Historical Society, but they decided to go separate, which was fine. The only thing they had, they met in the room at the bottom of the basement of the Huntington Bank. And fortunately, Laura King Zepernick taught a beginning class. Now, I knew mine wasn't Bowling Green, so I took the class. But basically, as she said, you do your genealogy where you live, not where you came from. And so I started right out because I wanted to help my dad. My dad was still living in his 80s. He lived to be 2 months shy of 97.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
And I was the only one who had moved further than 6 miles from home. I was 200 miles.
Yeah.
So in doing my dad's work, she suggested some of us join the local group. And we had a former editor of the newspaper, Paul Jones, who's one of our first ones, and Glenn Van Warmer, who did our newsletter, and Paul Moyer. And we were really some of the core group, along with Mike Simpson in the courthouse.
Did you uncover any skeletons when you did your genealogy?
No, one of my, I guess, through a cousin's work on my mother's side, it had been a nephew, an uncle. There were headlines in the paper about to avoid being a bigamist or having a paternity suit. He married
In a big hurry.
But I enjoy it. And so it's just fun to do with others. So as we began to put things together, we did our own publishing of books, or to collate our newsletter. Glenn Van Warmer had done it all by himself, really almost up until the time he died. And so we felt, some of us, there ought to be a core doing some work. You can't do it in a meeting once a month. And so there were a couple of them who came to my basement and worked until we finally formed a group to come there on Monday and answer requests and so forth. And to collate our newsletter, well, I used a typewriter at that time. We all did. We didn't know what these other things were. And one end of our basement had a cistern. The old days, the water in Bowling Green was so bad that they actually, either outside the home, you had a cistern for supply of water. And because you just didn't have a big enough water supply. So there was one end of the basement sealed in with about a 12-inch thick stone wall, and it still had water in it. So we had drained that and cut down, used the big hammers, taken down the wall, and then laid a new pavement an inch or so on the floor. And that we always called the cistern, so that's why the nickname carried over to the genealogy group. And so we met in the cistern. And but the other end of the room had a pool table that we put the top on for ping pong, and that's what we collated. So
wow.
we walked a few dents around the floor.
So when you're working with the Wood County Historical Society and doing all this genealogy, did you learn about any fascinating or interesting characters from our area?
I was, I had somebody tell me about the days when Pretty Boy Floyd
Oh, yeah.
she found out when she came home from school, he had been up on their porch.
Oh, my
They were in
goodness.
the chasing for him. I'd already heard the stories. In the faculty, we had John Davidson and his wife, Ruth. They had both come from Fostoria. And when Ruth had gotten out of high school, she worked in a bank in Fostoria. And it was Dellinger that she was taken captive of.
Oh, my
and to
goodness.
have her tell that story, she was scared. I think it still affected her as an older woman. I mean, her whole life, because she described having been on the running board beside with him holding on to her arm, and she was scared to death.
I bet.
And they finally stopped and put tacks down the road behind them, and got away and left her at that
Well, that
point.
was fortunate. Oh, man. Well, while you were at Bowling Green, a lot of movements have come and gone. Civil rights, the women's movement. How did any of that affect you and your family?
I really don't know that I can't think of it in any way that it's changed. I guess we work on the older part of it.
Well, I was thinking about the incident at Kent State and any of the things that, if it kind of had any repercussions here.
That particular one, very little. Our people, there were enough people on campus, like my husband, who wouldn't let anything stop them from getting into a building if they wanted to.
Yeah.
I remember one of his early experiences. One of his better students, he heard that he was in jail, and so he came by the jail on his way home. I've never known him to come home. He was pale as a ghost before, but this fellow had been caught in a car with a high school teacher, and just how times have changed, because at that point, and of course, he had forced them to let him talk to Russ.
Yeah.
I don't know what's happened now, but he was so furious because there was a judge who was running for office again. I mean, the poor guy sat there in jail for months and months without a charge being brought against him.
And why?
Simply because he had been in a car with, and I suppose that the high school teacher was arrested too. But that was the end of his college career and
Oh, my
any
goodness.
kind of future.
And was he of a different race? What
No,
was the issue?
it was two males. Two males.
So we've been talking a little bit about your involvement in the genealogy and history of the area. One of the projects that I'm really interested in learning about is the Living History Day, and also the Adopt a Cemetery program that you were so active in.
Well, with the Living History Day, we had just finally put together a new book of all of the tombstones in Oak Grove Cemetery. And I asked Ann Householder to come in and talk it over, see if we could think of some way to publicize it. And I had brought back my copy of 100 Years of Bowling Green that had just been published. And there were the team who had put that together, and I said, if we could go to the Oak Grove Cemetery, we could call it a Living History Day, and I wonder if we could get these people to work on it. Well, she agreed that was a pretty good idea, and we went through the ones that were still living, and the 4 that were still living. We called each one of them right then. There was Pat McGinnis, Joan, oh boy, I don't know if I can come up with all of them right now. Sergeant, Kay Sargent. And so we individually called each one of them individually, and without hesitation, they said yes, they thought it would be a good idea. So that was our first one. And after 2 or 3 years, we gave it to the Historical Society. So.
Have you played any people in Living History Day?
No, because that's local and I'm not.
Who are some of the more interesting people that have been portrayed in Living History Day? And the thing that's so interesting is that it's not like generals from far away.
It's somebody who's buried here. Now they
right.
moved from Oak Grove Cemetery after the first year. In fact, the first year, it rained so hard we could not hold it there. It was held in the library. Rain just came down in sheets. And I think, one of the first one was Jack Rainey, who had been the architect at the university. And he lived to be in his 90s. So it was his, maybe a nephew, I don't think a direct line, maybe grandson, drove here to be here for it. And I think they had an accident on the way here and came in another car. And the fellow who played the part did a great job. So those were, and I don't even remember who else we. It's now gone on 10 or 11 years.
That's right. Yeah. Established a really popular event for the community.
The person I have to thank a lot, and I didn't give him the right praise. I didn't give it at the time I should. Jim Gordon.
Yeah.
Even for the cover of our book, he made a special effort to go out and do the picture. And nowhere in that book did I give him credit. I've always regretted that.
You just did. When I was a student at BGSU, you could drive along Oak Grove Cemetery. And I always thought it was so nice. But I was a graduate student, and I imagine that cemetery has seen some times that we never intended for things to happen
the
there.
Students were beginning to use it for crosswalks, so that's why we had to create the separate entrance.
Yeah.
The mausoleum, was it there when you were?
Yes.
And when the city was forced to take it over, this is work I've met in the state cemetery dispute resolution work. And so they weren't happy about it. And they would ask me my opinion on things because when they removed the people from there, one of the women had brought a suit, were trying to bring a suit against the city because they would not put her person in the mausoleum. She was complaining. They would not pay for anything. And I believe she wanted him moved for his Portage or one of the other cemeteries. So it was interesting to be on the board at the State House in Columbus and have somebody come from our city department to defend the case and not say anything. And I said, you don't have a problem, because they offered them a place and a marker.
Yeah.
Because they created one part of the cemetery like that. And to be supportive of that, we had, when they were trying to contact every family, we had a gal who just spent, it was her life to do this kind of work. She looked up obituaries of everyone to try to find family to tell the city department who to write to, who to contact. And then we put together very short obits for every one of those and let the city pay for it. And we had 200 copies printed. And we've given the very end of those back to, they have them at the cemetery. If there's somebody that's buried there, they had them to give to them.
Well, you are someone who has spent a lot of time in cemeteries.
Yes.
Tell me a little bit about the Adopt a Cemetery program. And then maybe the most interesting or moving headstone or anything you've seen in the cemetery that really spoke to you?
One of the, this is something I would do for my husband's work. We've been known to stop at cemeteries. I guess probably one of the times as I began to work back in his family in Western New York, with friends, we liked to go to flower shows. We went to craft shows. We used to go to usually just a day trip. Well, then we started making it a little longer, and we would stop at cemeteries that I could connect where his family had stopped and lived, so I could find some of those. And what's my point on that? For here locally, we were doing the books that had the names on the stones. I'm much more of the journalist in the writing part of it. When pictures came along, I've never been a photographer. I'll cut off the top of the head. In fact, in high school, I won an essay contest. It was one per county in the state of Indiana. So of the 92 counties, there were 70-some, and we were given a 6-day bus tour of the state of Ohio. What a wonderful way to travel the state.
Yeah.
And they let me take the box camera that we had in the family, and I had 3 rolls of film. Well, I used one film, and I used the second film, and when I put the third film in, it was the first film that had already been exposed.
No.
So that's how.
Those are some interesting pictures, weren't they?
So that's my story of cameras. But for a program, because Merle and I like the outdoors, and we used to have bluebird houses in fence rows. Well, fence rows, wooden ones are particularly gone, so putting up your own houses and along the roads were one way to do it. And I figured cemeteries were a good place because the cemeteries are usually open. They're not like Oak Grove, but usually they're very open, so that's where you would have the box facing in, and they'd be placed around the perimeter. So we had an evening with the bluebirds, and at least one Girl Scout, the younger girls, brownies, I guess, okay, she brought them to the meeting, and they wanted to put up houses. So they had 4 boxes, and Merle helped them put them up at the museum around the cemetery out there. And then he took them back out to monitor, because this was the other thing, get the right kind of visitors to the cemeteries. We were actually having some bad vandalism problems in the cemeteries.
And when was that?
Must have been in the 90s.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Because I can remember I'd had a call from a friend at Tontogany, and she was in tears. She said, "Lolita, they vandalized our cemetery tonight." And of course it got publicity. When Sergeant, the one where Merle's buried, had some vandalism, I was called by somebody else, somebody who noticed it or found out about it, and she was going to call the Sentinel. They had actually gone to 3 cemeteries that night, and I said, "No, I'm calling the Sheriff's Department." I had the less publicity.
That's right.
And so we set up, I don't know if there was any publicity, but if anyone would turn in, there was a reward, because that's what we wanted. And they actually had somebody within the group of boys that were doing it, before they went to another one, he had let them know they were going to be there. And they were set up, but the police said it was so heartbreaking. It was Art Bradner, and when those old stones broke, before they could get in and stop them, it just broke your heart.
Yeah.
So So this was the Bluebirds was to get the right kind of visitors in there because they were to go back and monitor the boxes.
Right.
And it was effective by different. I mean, some people took it on, did a great job, and others didn't. And we had no policing, so
Right.
that's what it is. But I have pictures. That's
That's wonderful. What do you hope for the future of Bowling Green? You've seen a lot change, and what do you hope for the future for our community?
I'm to the point. I'm not ready for more change. But you're not going to stop it.
That's true.
Yeah. So, I really, I cannot predict it's going to change. I hope it keeps the community feeling. And I know, like, the city building is inadequate over here, but they see the dangers of moving out to the edge of town too.
Yes. Yeah.
So,
Well, thank you for your time today, and I hope that your neighborhood does experience a resurgence, and you will need to get out the tablecloth again.
Thank you. Thank you.